Cada amanecer, al atravesar la luz las cortinas de mi dormitorio, mi mano buscaba instintivamente el espacio vacío a mi lado. Habían pasado 5 años, pero aún esperaba a Edith allí. Dicen que el dolor se desvanece, pero simplemente se convierte en un dolor familiar. Soy Chester Blackwell, de 74 años, y vivo solo en la casa que Edith y yo compramos hace 46 años. En aquel entonces, era una imponente casa victoriana, plagada de goteras y ruidosos suelos de madera. La zona no era próspera, pero era todo lo que podíamos permitirnos. Ahora, Old Town se encuentra entre los distritos más caros de Columbus, y mi propiedad está valorada en 6 cifras. Los cambios de la vida son realmente notables. Me costaba levantarme, mis articulaciones protestaban. La artritis ha sido mi compañera constante durante años. Edith siempre se aseguró de que tomara aceite de pescado y glucosamina. Tras su fallecimiento, abandoné esa y muchas otras rutinas. No quedaba nadie que me lo recordara. Mi ritual matutino sigue siendo el mismo. Primero, un café negro fuerte, luego una tostada con mantequilla de cacahuete, seguido de un vistazo rápido a los titulares de los periódicos. Sí, sigo prefiriendo el periódico físico, a diferencia de la generación actual, adicta a la tecnología y a sus aplicaciones de noticias. Después, me pongo una vieja chaqueta de tweed y salgo a dar un paseo. La imprenta que fundé hace medio siglo ahora pertenece a una corporación que la adquirió por una suma considerable. Solo accedí a la venta después del diagnóstico de Edith. El dinero no la salvó, pero sí nos aseguró una jubilación cómoda. A veces añoro el aroma a tinta y el zumbido rítmico de las prensas, pero con el tiempo uno se acostumbra a todo. Hoy decidí visitar nuestra antigua imprenta, solo para saludar a los pocos empleados que quedan. Solo quedan 3 de mi equipo original, Perkins, Lorraine y el viejo Patrick. Los demás fueron despedidos o reemplazados por jóvenes profesionales con títulos en diseño gráfico. Chester Patrick, mi viejo amigo y antiguo jefe de mecánicos, sonrió radiante al verme en la entrada. «Tonto, ¿qué te trae por aquí?», preguntó. «Solo quería ver si ya has arruinado mi obra maestra», refunfuñé, y mi expresión severa se suavizó rápidamente en una sonrisa. Charlamos un rato, sin que me diera cuenta. Patrick me invitó a comer al restaurante cercano, un pequeño local donde solíamos comer. Resultó que su hijo mayor había ascendido recientemente en su empresa de informática, y el menor se estaba preparando para la universidad. «¿Qué tal tu ROR?», preguntó Patrick, tomando un sorbo de café. «¿Sigue en la misma financiera?». Asentí, con una mezcla familiar de orgullo y aprensión. Ror, mi único hijo, siempre había sido un tanto enigmático. Un chico brillante, demostró un talento excepcional para las matemáticas y el análisis desde pequeño, pero también era reservado e inseguro. Edith creía que mi rigor era la causa, pero yo simplemente quería que madurara y se convirtiera en un hombre fuerte. «Parece que le va bien», respondí. «Llama una vez al mes para hablar de su trabajo y nuevos proyectos». «¿Cómo va su vida personal?». Patrick me guiñó un ojo. «¿Todavía no ha encontrado novia?». Suspiré. A los 40, es hora de considerar formar una familia, pero él está obsesionado con los números y las historias clínicas. Cuando yo tenía su edad, Ror ya tenía 15. Curiosamente, la idea de una posible nuera me despertaba emociones contradictorias. Por un lado, deseaba la felicidad de Ror. Por otro, temía que el matrimonio lo distanciara aún más de mí. Tras la muerte de Edith, nuestra relación se volvió especialmente tensa. Había intentado convencerme de que ingresara en una residencia de ancianos. «Por tu bien, papá». Me enfurecí tanto que me negué a hablarle durante 2 meses. Al volver a casa después de ver a Patrick, sentí ese vacío familiar. La espaciosa casa de 4 habitaciones, antes llena de risas infantiles y la música de Edith, ahora parecía un baúl de recuerdos. Deambulé por las habitaciones, enderezando distraídamente los cuadros de las paredes. Aquí, Edith y yo el día de nuestra boda. Aquí, el joven Ror en su primera bicicleta. Aquí, los 3 en la costa de Michigan. Ror y yo compartíamos una historia compleja. Siempre estuvo más cerca de su madre, la dulce y comprensiva Edith, quien podía escucharlo charlar durante horas sobre dinosaurios y naves espaciales. Yo, en cambio, siempre estaba ocupado con la imprenta, y en casa, exigía disciplina y orden. Mi servicio militar en Vietnam me había influido profundamente, y no sabía cómo guiarlo de otra manera que con firmeza y estructura. Cuando Ror se fue a la universidad en Chicago, Se abrió un abismo de malentendidos entre nosotros. Rara vez volvía de vacaciones, prefería quedarse con amigos o trabajar a tiempo parcial. Después de graduarse, aceptó un puesto en una importante empresa financiera y parecía haber olvidado por completo a sus padres. Solo Edith podía convencerlo de que asistiera a cenas familiares en ocasiones especiales. Eso cambió cuando Edith enfermó. Cáncer de páncreas, un diagnóstico que parecía una sentencia de muerte. Ror voló inmediatamente después de enterarse de la noticia y permaneció con nosotros hasta el final. Durante esos meses difíciles, fui testigo de una persona transformada, cariñosa, atenta, dispuesta a hacer cualquier cosa por su madre. Él y yo nos turnábamos para quedarnos junto a su cama todas las noches, y por primera vez en muchos años, compartimos una conversación verdaderamente abierta. Después del funeral, Ror se quedó una semana, ayudándome con el papeleo y ofreciéndome un apoyo discreto. Creí que por fin habíamos conectado, pero luego regresó a Chicago, y nuestra comunicación volvió a reducirse a llamadas esporádicas y mensajes navideños. Me serví un whisky, un pequeño capricho que me permitía por las noches, y me acomodé en mi sillón junto a la chimenea. Edith no lo habría aprobado. Siempre insistía en que el alcohol y los medicamentos para la presión arterial eran incompatibles, pero Edith ya no estaba, y el whisky me ayudó a calmar el dolor de su ausencia. Una llamada telefónica interrumpió mis pensamientos. El nombre de mi hijo apareció en la pantalla. Ror, respondí, intentando un tono alegre. ¿Pasa algo? Normalmente llamas los domingos. Hola, papá. Mi hijo sonaba inusualmente animado. Tengo noticias fantásticas. Quería decírtelo primero. Me tensé, anticipando otro ascenso o una mudanza aún más lejos de Columbus. Me casé, papá, soltó Ror. Se llama Britney y es increíble. Nos conocimos en un evento de empresa hace 3 meses y, bueno, fue amor a primera vista. Sentí un nudo en la garganta. 3 meses. Mi hijo se casó con una mujer a la que solo conocía desde hacía 3 meses y ni siquiera me la había presentado antes de la boda. Felicidades, hijo, logré decir. Esto es realmente inesperado. Sé que todo pasó tan rápido. La voz de Ror tenía una mezcla de impaciencia y emoción. Pero cuando sabes que es la persona indicada, ¿para qué esperar, verdad? Britney trabaja en relaciones públicas. Es tan brillante, tan enérgica. Estoy seguro de que la adorarás. ¿Cómo puedo amar a alguien que ni siquiera conozco? Quise preguntar, pero me contuve. Queremos ir a Columbus el próximo fin de semana para conocerte, continuó Ror. ¿Te parece bien? Por supuesto, intenté que mi voz sonara entusiasta. Me encantaría conocer a tu esposa. La esposa de Ror. Esas palabras me resultaron extrañas. Siempre había imaginado que cuando mi hijo decidiera casarse, sería una gran ocasión, conmigo en el primer banco, viéndolo intercambiar votos. Que Edith estaría allí, enjugándose discretamente las lágrimas de felicidad. Ror no pareció notar mi confusión. Llegaremos el viernes por la noche, si te parece bien. Estamos de luna de miel, 2 semanas de vacaciones. El viernes estará bien. Ya estaba planeando qué comprar, qué cocinar, cómo preparar la habitación de invitados. Te espero. Después de la llamada, me quedé mirando a lo lejos un buen rato. Mi hijo, mi Ror, reservado y centrado en su carrera, se había casado de repente con una desconocida. ¿Qué sabía yo de ella? Solo su nombre y profesión. ¿Cómo era? ¿Lo amaba de verdad? ¿O era un matrimonio de conveniencia? Ror nunca había tenido mucha suerte con las mujeres, demasiado serio, demasiado absorto en sus propios pensamientos. Me levanté y fui al armario donde guardaba los álbumes de fotos familiares. Saqué un álbum lleno de fotos de Ror desde su infancia hasta su graduación de la universidad. Allí estaba, con 7 años, mostrándome con orgullo su primer aeromodelismo. Allí estaba el adolescente hosco al que Edith insistió en fotografiar antes del baile de graduación. Allí estaba el graduado, diploma en mano, con una sonrisa insegura. ¿Qué dirías, Edith? Me pregunté, mirando la foto de mi esposa. ¿Aprobarías su elección? Sabía lo que me aconsejaría: dale una oportunidad, Chester. No la juzgues hasta que la conozcas. Edith siempre había poseído más sabiduría que yo en cuestiones humanas. Con un profundo suspiro, cerré el álbum y miré el calendario. Faltaban 4 días para el viernes. 4 días para prepararme para un nuevo capítulo en la vida de mi hijo, y quizás en la mía. Empecé a prepararme para la llegada de Ror y su nueva esposa con varios días de antelación. Reordené la ropa de cama en la habitación de invitados, quité el polvo de las estanterías e incluso contraté un servicio de limpieza para toda la casa. Edith se habría sentido orgullosa de mis esfuerzos. Normalmente no me fijo en el polvo ni el desorden. El viernes llegó inesperadamente rápido. Preparé la cena, un asado con la receta de Edith, su famosa tarta de manzana y compré una botella de buen vino. Por primera vez en mucho tiempo, me sentía emocionada por la próxima reunión. ¿Cómo sería esta Britney? ¿Querría a mi hijo como se merecía? Exactamente a las 6 de la tarde, oí que se acercaba un coche. Mirando por la ventana, vi un Lexus plateado flamante, claramente fuera del alcance de mi hijo con su sueldo de analista financiero. O había recibido un ascenso importante, o el coche pertenecía a su nueva esposa. Abrí la puerta antes de que pudieran llamar. Ror parecía feliz, pero un poco ansioso. Me abrazó y percibí un ligero aroma a colonia cara. Solía usar una loción para después del afeitado sencilla. Papá, ella es Britney, mi esposa, dijo, la última palabra pronunciada con una reverencia que sugería que no podía creer su buena suerte. Desvié la mirada hacia la mujer que estaba a su lado. Britney, ahora Blackwell, era una rubia impactante de unos 35 años, con un maquillaje perfecto y un traje que parecía recién salido de una pasarela. Sonrió, pero enseguida noté que su mirada permanecía fría y evaluadora. Es un placer, señor Blackwell. Extendió una mano con una manicura impecable. Ror me ha hablado mucho de usted. Por fin, puedo conocer al legendario Chester. Su voz sonaba como la de una locutora profesional, con inflexiones practicadas y pausas deliberadas. Había un aire de artificialidad que me puso en guardia al instante. Pero decidí darle el beneficio de la duda. Al fin y al cabo, los primeros encuentros suelen ser incómodos. Igualmente, Britney. Por favor, pase. No se quede en la puerta. La cena está casi lista. Los conduje a la sala de estar, intentando disimular mi sorpresa mientras Britney observaba el espacio con una decepción apenas disimulada. Su mirada recorrió los muebles antiguos, la colección de libros, los cuadros de las paredes, y un atisbo de desdén brilló en sus ojos. ¡Qué casa tan auténtica!, comentó finalmente. ¿Cuánta historia aquí? ¿Cuánto tiempo lleva viviendo aquí, señor Blackwell? 46 años, respondí con orgullo. Edith y yo la compramos cuando esperábamos a Ror. Estaba en un estado lamentable, pero la restauramos nosotros mismos. Se nota. Britney asintió como si confirmara un diagnóstico. ¡Qué estilo tan único! Durante la cena, intenté saber más sobre Britney. Resultó que era directora de relaciones públicas de una gran farmacéutica, tenía un máster en marketing de una universidad de renombre y, por lo que ella describió, llevaba una vida social muy activa. Ror y yo nos conocimos en un evento benéfico, dijo, cortando con gracia un trozo de carne. Su empresa lo patrocinó y yo dirigí la organización. Él destacaba entre todos esos financieros egocéntricos, tan modesto, tan inteligente. Ror la miraba con adoración, como un niño a una estrella inalcanzable. Nunca lo había visto tan dependiente de la opinión de los demás. Mi hijo siempre había sido reservado, un poco inseguro, pero independiente en su juicio. Ahora buscaba constantemente la aprobación de Britney, observando sus reacciones, incluso forzándose a complacerla. ¿Cómo decidiste casarte tan rápido?, pregunté, intentando un tono informal. Britney y Ror intercambiaron una mirada cómplice, como si compartieran un secreto. El tiempo no importa cuando encuentras a tu alma gemela, dijo con la seguridad de una oradora. Además, a mi edad, no quieres pasar años probando una relación. Ambos sabemos lo que queremos de la vida. La vi tocarse el vientre con un gesto característico y miré a mi hijo con curiosidad. Ror se sonrojó, pero negó con la cabeza. No, no se trataba de un embarazo inesperado. Después de cenar, Britney pidió que la visitaran. La guié por las habitaciones, contándole la historia de cada una. Para mí, la casa era un ser vivo, un depósito de preciados recuerdos con Edith, de la infancia de Ror. Para Britney, era simplemente una propiedad vieja con decoración anticuada. El baño necesita una reforma completa, declaró, mirando mi preciada bañera vintage de hierro fundido con forma de pata de león que Edith y yo encontramos en una venta de segunda mano. Y ese papel pintado, madre mía, merecería estar en un museo del mal gusto de los 70. Permanecí en silencio, aunque rebosante de indignación. ¿Quién era ella para criticar una casa en la que no había vivido ni un día? La velada continuó en la sala con vino. Britney preguntó por la imprenta, mi tiempo en Vietnam y mis actividades actuales, pero sus preguntas parecían más calculadas que genuinamente curiosas. Era como si me evaluara como una acción en la bolsa, debatiendo si era una inversión que valiera la pena. Cuando empecé a hablar de mis amigos del club de veteranos local, con quienes me encontraba semanalmente, bostezó abiertamente. Lo siento, señor Blackwell. Estamos cansados de los viajes. Se levantó del sofá con la gracia de una modelo. Si no le importa, nos retiramos a dormir. Roar la siguió obedientemente, como si llevara correa. Descansa, claro. Mañana nos conoceremos mejor. Observé a mi hijo, esperando que se quedara un momento, pero me ofreció una sonrisa culpable y siguió a su esposa. A solas, me quedé un buen rato en la silla, reflexionando sobre mi primera impresión. Britney me desagradaba, y no podía evitar la sensación de que tras su impecable apariencia se escondía una fría calculadora. Pero eran solo los celos de un anciano que no quería compartir la atención de su único hijo con una recién llegada. No tenía respuesta. A la mañana siguiente, me desperté con los sonidos desconocidos de alguien preparando el desayuno en mi casa. Cuando bajé a la cocina, encontré a Britney junto a los fogones. Vestía ropa elegante de estar por casa, con el pelo recogido en un moño informal, pero su maquillaje ya estaba perfecto. Buenos días, señor Blackwell, anunció con forzada alegría. Pensé en hacer tostadas francesas. Roar dijo que te gustan. A mí sí me gustaban las tostadas francesas, pero las suyas parecían una ilustración de una revista gourmet. Perfectas, adornadas con bayas frescas y menta, pero completamente insípidas, todo por la apariencia, nada por el alma, como la propia Britney. Se pasó el día esforzándose por ser la nuera ideal, se interesaba por mis aficiones, se ofrecía a ayudar en la casa e incluso intentaba revisar mi vieja colección de sellos. Pero sus ojos delataban aburrimiento e impaciencia, y sus comentarios eran condescendientes, como si le hablara a una niña petulante en lugar de a un hombre maduro. Esa noche, sentados en el porche, Roar finalmente reveló lo que sospechaba que era el verdadero propósito de su visita. Papá, Britney y yo hemos estado hablando largo y tendido sobre el futuro, empezó, mirando nervioso a su esposa, quien asintió con aprobación. Y estábamos pensando que quizás deberíamos mudarnos contigo. Sabes, estás completamente solo aquí. Es una casa grande. Probablemente necesites ayuda. Me quedé paralizada, incapaz de procesar lo que oía. Roar, que apenas había tenido tiempo para visitarme en los últimos años, ¿de repente quería vivir conmigo? ¿Cuál es el verdadero motivo de tanta preocupación? Pregunté directamente, mirando a mi hijo a los ojos. Parecía avergonzado, pero Britney intervino rápidamente. Señor Blackwell, Roar y yo estamos realmente preocupados por usted. Su voz era melódica, como la de una actriz de profesión. Vivir solo en una casa tan grande a tu edad es un riesgo, y podríamos ayudarte, mantenerte sano, hacerte compañía. Además, hizo una pausa, planeamos tener hijos pronto. ¿No sería maravilloso que tus nietos crecieran contigo? La mención de posibles nietos fue una táctica magistral. Soñaba con tener nietos, una oportunidad para rectificar los errores que cometía al criar a Roar, pero algo en la oferta me inquietaba. ¿Qué hay de tu apartamento en Chicago y de tu trabajo? Pregunté con sensatez. Roar bajó la mirada. Verás, papá, me despidieron hace 3 meses. La empresa se estaba reestructurando y me eliminaron el puesto. Eso fue todo. El matrimonio repentino, el repentino deseo de mudarme, todo encajó. Ya encontré un nuevo trabajo aquí en Columbus, añadió Roar rápidamente. Empiezo en 2 semanas y Britney puede teletrabajar. Entonces no tienes dónde vivir. Pregunté sin rodeos. Chester. Exclamó Britney con indignación teatral. ¿Cómo puedes pensar eso? Estamos preocupados por ti. Queremos estar cerca de ti. Claro, podríamos alquilar o comprar una casa en Columbus, pero ¿no sería mejor unir esfuerzos? Una familia debe mantenerse unida. Miré a mi hijo, intentando discernir qué estaba pasando realmente en su vida. Parecía cansado y perdido, para nada como alguien que acaba de encontrar la felicidad conyugal. Roar, ¿puedo hablar contigo un momento? Hice un gesto hacia la casa, queriendo estar a solas con él. A Britney no le gustó la idea, pero me ofreció una sonrisa comprensiva y dijo que iría a arreglarse. Cuando estuvimos solos, le pregunté sin rodeos, «Hijo, ¿qué pasa realmente? ¿Por qué nunca me dijiste que perdiste tu trabajo? ¿Y por qué la prisa por casarte y mudarte?» Ror suspiró, y por un instante, vi al chico que solía confiar en mí antes de distanciarse. «Papá, quiero mucho a Britney. Ella, me ayudó cuando todo se desmoronaba. Estaba desesperado después de que me despidieran, endeudado, casi deprimido, y ella apareció, me sacó de ese atolladero y me ofreció la solución a todos mis problemas. ¿Casarme y mudarme con mi padre rico?», dije con sarcasmo. «No, o sea, no fue así». Ror negó con la cabeza. «Fue idea mía mudarme contigo. Estamos realmente preocupados por ti». Hizo una pausa, buscando las palabras. «Y sí, nos ayudará a recuperarnos. Pero no es bueno para nosotros estar unidos después de todos estos años separados». Había verdad en sus palabras. Extrañaba a mi hijo. Y pensar que volviera a vivir en esta casa me reconfortaba el alma. Quizás estaba siendo demasiado dura con Britney. Quizás ella realmente amaba a Ror y quería ayudarlo. «Lo consideraré», dije finalmente. «Dame tiempo». Los días siguientes se convirtieron en una extraña farsa. Britney intentó mostrar su mejor versión cocinando comidas elaboradas, aunque yo prefería la comida sencilla, sugiriendo que renováramos el interior, lo que significaba descartar cualquier cosa que me recordara a Edith, hablando de sus planes para el jardín. A pesar de que este era el orgullo de Edith, y lo mantuve exactamente como ella lo diseñó. Ror, mientras tanto, parecía cada vez más ansioso, como si temiera que los rechazara. Lo vi adulando a Britney, pendiente de cada palabra, y eso me preocupó. Mi hijo siempre había tenido sus propias opiniones, pero ahora parecía haberse disuelto por completo en esta mujer. La última noche antes de irse, tenían que volver a Chicago para ultimar detalles antes de mudarse, tomé una decisión. «Puedes mudarte», dije durante la cena, viendo brillar los ojos de Britney. «Pero con una condición, es mi casa y yo tomaré todas las decisiones importantes». «Por supuesto, señor Blackwell». Britney sonrió con su sonrisa perfecta. «Ni se nos ocurriría cambiar nada sin tu consentimiento, ¿verdad, cariño?». Ror asintió, visiblemente aliviado. «Gracias, papá. No te arrepentirás». Pero al observar el brillo triunfal en los ojos de Britney, empecé a dudar de mi decisión. Sin embargo, lo hacía por mi hijo. Quizás una vida en común nos ayudaría a reconectar, a reparar la relación fracturada por años de separación. Y si Britney lo amaba de verdad, bueno, estaba dispuesta a intentar llevarme bien con ella. No sabía entonces cuánto llegaría a lamentar esa decisión. Habían pasado 3 meses desde que Ror y Britney se mudaron a mi casa. 3 meses que transformaron mi vida ordenada en una lucha constante por preservar mi dignidad en mi propio espacio. Durante las primeras semanas, todo transcurrió con relativa fluidez. Britney demostró una cortesía ejemplar, cocinaba platos inusuales, aunque yo prefería mi comida habitual, y me pidió mi opinión sobre diversos asuntos. Ror aceptó su nuevo trabajo, menos prestigioso que el anterior, pero estable. Salía temprano y regresaba tarde, dejándome sola con su esposa. Y fue entonces cuando la verdadera Britney empezó a emerger. Sin testigos, rápidamente se deshizo de la fachada de nuera cariñosa. El primer gran conflicto surgió en torno a mi oficina. Era mi santuario, la habitación donde pasaba la mayor parte del día leyendo, trabajando en mis memorias o simplemente reflexionando. Mis libros, documentos, colecciones y recuerdos estaban allí guardados. Un día, al regresar de una excursión, encontré la puerta del estudio abierta de par en par. Dentro, Britney dirigía a 2 trabajadores que retiraban mi viejo escritorio, una pieza antigua en la que había trabajado toda mi vida. «¿Qué pasa?», pregunté, sintiendo una oleada de ira. «Ay, Chester», fingió Britney alegremente sorprendida. «Quería sorprenderte. Este viejo escritorio no es nada ergonómico y probablemente te esté causando dolor de espalda. He pedido uno nuevo, moderno y de altura regulable». «No te di permiso para cambiar nada en mi oficina», dije, intentando mantener la compostura. Lo descartó con un gesto, como si espantara una mosca molesta. «Vamos, Chester. No puedes vivir en el pasado para siempre. Esta casa necesita una reforma, y tu oficina la necesita primero». Ese escritorio debería estar en un museo, no en un hogar. Devuelve el escritorio a su sitio, les dije a los trabajadores, quienes intercambiaron miradas inseguras. No le hagas caso, intervino Britney con una sonrisa fría. Las personas mayores siempre se resisten al cambio. Continúa con tu trabajo. Esta es mi casa y yo decido qué cambios quiero, dije con firmeza. De hecho, ahora es nuestra casa, replicó Britney. Y yo también tengo voz y voto. Rory y yo lo hemos hablado, y él está de acuerdo en que es hora de hacer algunos cambios. Hablaron de los cambios en mi oficina sin mí. Queríamos que fuera una sorpresa. Rory sabe que eres tradicional y se opondrá a cualquier cambio. Así que pensó que sería más sencillo así. Volvió a esbozar su sonrisa artificial. Confía en nosotros, Chester, queremos lo mejor para ti. Al final, insistí, y me devolvieron el escritorio. Pero esa fue solo la primera escaramuza de una larga guerra. Poco a poco, la casa empezó a transformarse, no siempre con mi consentimiento. Primero, los cuadros de Edith desaparecieron de la sala. Britney los sustituyó por pinturas abstractas contemporáneas, explicando que demasiadas fotos personales creaban una atmósfera agobiante. Luego reorganizó los muebles, tiró la vieja lámpara de pie que Edith y yo habíamos comprado durante nuestro primer año de matrimonio y cambió las cortinas. Cada vez que expresaba mi insatisfacción, ella respondía con la misma frase, Rory está de acuerdo conmigo. Y, en efecto, mi hijo parecía completamente subordinado a los deseos de su esposa. Apoyaba todas sus decisiones, incluso las que claramente me herían. La casa poco a poco dejó de ser mía. Todos los objetos que me recordaban a Edith desaparecieron uno a uno. Britney incluso intentó sacar la ropa de Edith del armario de mi habitación, afirmando que era hora de pasar página. Tienes que empezar a salir con mujeres de tu edad, declaró un día durante el desayuno. El club de mayores seguro que tiene candidatas adecuadas. No me interesan otras mujeres, respondí con frialdad. No es sano aferrarse al pasado. Negó con la cabeza con fingida compasión. Edith lleva 5 años desaparecida, Chester. Habría querido que avanzaras. Ni se te ocurra hablar por mi esposa. Rara vez perdía los estribos, pero en ese momento apenas podía contenerme. El problema no eran solo los objetos físicos. Britney estaba cambiando poco a poco el estilo de vida de la casa. Mis amigos, que solían visitarlos con frecuencia, ahora se sentían incómodos bajo su escrutinio. Criticaba sus modales rústicos y se burlaba de sus anécdotas, tachándolas de divagaciones seniles. Un día, Patrick, un viejo amigo, llegó como siempre los jueves por la noche para una partida de ajedrez. Britney lo recibió en la puerta con una sonrisa falsa. Chester no se encuentra bien esta noche, mintió. Quizás en otra ocasión. Lo oí desde la cocina y salí al pasillo. Estoy bien, Patrick. Pasa, dije, ignorando la mirada furiosa de Britney. Armó un buen escándalo cuando Patrick se fue. Intento establecer un ambiente familiar normal aquí, y tú traes a tus viejos amigos todos los días. Gritó. La casa se está convirtiendo en una residencia de ancianos. ¿Cómo podemos empezar nuestra vida familiar si tus amigos siempre están presentes? Son mis amigos y siempre serán bienvenidos, dije con firmeza. Y si no te gusta, puedes buscar otro sitio donde vivir. Lo hablaremos con Rory, amenazó. Y, fiel a su palabra, esa noche, mi hijo se acercó a mí para hablar en serio. Parecía cansado y algo decaído. Papá, a Britney le preocupa que haya demasiadas caras desconocidas en casa, empezó, vacilante. Quizás podrías quedar con tus amigos en otro sitio, en una cafetería o en un parque. Hijo, ¿te oyes? Lo miré directamente a los ojos. ¿Sugieres que destierre a mis amigos de mi casa porque tu mujer se siente incómoda? Britney es muy sensible con el espacio personal, murmuró, evitando mi mirada. Necesita tiempo para adaptarse. ¿Y mi espacio? Precant. Te permití vivir en mi casa, pero eso no significa que tenga que cambiar mi estilo de vida. Papá, tienes que entender. Britney y yo necesitamos construir nuestra familia, nuestras tradiciones. Es difícil hacerlo con tantos. Dudó. Viejos. Me di cuenta de que mi hijo no se refería solo a posesiones o amigos. Estaba hablando de mí. Yo era el viejo obstáculo para su nueva vida. Poco a poco, empecé a sentirme como un extraño en mi propia casa. Britney organizaba cenas para sus colegas y conocidos sin pedirme permiso. Llenaban la casa de conversaciones ruidosas, risas y el olor a perfume caro y humo de cigarrillo. Me presentaron como el padre de Roar, como si yo fuera simplemente un apego a la propiedad en lugar de su dueño. Un día, descubrí que faltaba la llave de mi oficina. Cuando le pregunté a Britney, fingió sorpresa. ¿Por qué cerrarías con llave una habitación en tu propia casa? ¿Qué escondes ahí, Chester? Valoro mi privacidad, respondí. Sabes, no debería haber secretos en una familia. Negó con la cabeza fingiendo decepción. Roar cree que te estás volviendo un poco paranoico. Es normal a tu edad, pero quizá valga la pena consultar con un especialista. Me di cuenta de que la llave no iba a reaparecer, así que cambié la cerradura. Esto provocó otra discusión. Britney alegó que no confiaba en ella, que estaba minando el vínculo familiar con mis sospechas. Roar volvió a ponerse de su lado, pero la gota que colmó el vaso fue la noche en que descubrí que las escrituras de la casa y mi testamento habían desaparecido de la caja fuerte del estudio. Le pregunté directamente a Roar cuando estuvimos solos. Hijo, ¿cogiste los papeles de mi caja fuerte? Dudó, y eso fue suficiente confirmación. Britney quería ver si todo estaba bien legalmente. Le preocupa el futuro. ¿Qué futuro? Pregunté con insistencia. Bueno, si te pasa algo, ya no eres joven, papá, y tenemos que estar preparados. No lo dejé terminar. Los documentos deben estar devueltos a la caja fuerte esta noche. Y dile a tu esposa que mis pertenencias no son asunto suyo. Roar asintió, pero vi miedo en sus ojos, no por mí, sino por la reacción de Britney. Los documentos estaban de vuelta en la caja fuerte, pero vi marcas de escaneo en ellos. No estaban doblados como los había dejado. Me hizo preguntarme qué otros planes estaría tramando mi nuera. Y entonces hoy, después de 3 meses de este agotador conflicto, las cosas finalmente llegaron a un punto crítico. Britney anunció una cena familiar. Preparó una comida gourmet, puso la mesa en la sala de estar en lugar de en nuestra cocina habitual, encendió velas y abrió una botella de vino caro. ¿Vamos a celebrarlo? Pregunté, sin comprender el motivo de tanta formalidad. Podría decirse que sí. Sonrió misteriosamente. Hoy se cumplen exactamente 3 meses desde que empezamos a vivir juntos. Creo que es hora de revisar nuestro progreso. La cena empezó con relativa calma. Britney le preguntó a Roar sobre su trabajo y compartió sus éxitos organizando una campaña de relaciones públicas. Comí en silencio, observándolos, sintiéndome como un extra en la gran producción de sus vidas. Después de la segunda copa de vino, Britney pasó al tema principal de la noche. Chester, Roar y yo hemos tenido una larga conversación y hemos decidido que es hora de hacer algunos ajustes, dijo en tono profesional, como en una reunión de empresa. Cada vez te cuesta más gestionar una casa tan grande. Vemos lo cansado que te cansa subiendo las escaleras, lo difícil que te resulta mantener el orden. Me las arreglo perfectamente, protesté. No hay necesidad de ser valiente, sonrió con indulgencia. Todos envejecemos. En fin, pensamos que sería más sensato que te mudaras a la casa de invitados del jardín. Es pequeña, acogedora, de una sola planta, sin escaleras, y nosotros nos encargaríamos de la casa principal. No podía creer lo que oía. Me sugerían mudarme de mi casa a un pequeño anexo en el jardín. La casa de invitados era básicamente una caseta de jardín que había convertido en un pequeño estudio para familiares que venían de visita. Solo tenía una habitación con cocina americana y un baño pequeño. Esta es mi casa, dije lentamente. No me voy a ningún sitio. Chester, sé razonable. Britney frunció el ceño. Tienes 74 años. A tu edad, es arriesgado vivir solo en una casa grande. Así estaremos cerca para vigilarte. No necesito supervisión. Eso es lo que dice todo el mundo hasta que se cae y se rompe la cadera. Se rió como si hubiera dicho algo ingenioso. Además, Roar y yo necesitamos más espacio. Planeamos tener hijos y necesitaremos habitaciones adicionales. La habitación de Roar sigue arriba, señalé. Está vacía. Una habitación no es suficiente, dijo Britney. We need a nursery, a playroom, my workspace.
This house was designed for a family, and you're occupying it alone. It's unsustainable. This house is mine, I repeated.
And I'm not moving anywhere.
She glanced at Roar, who sat with his eyes fixed on his plate, as if the conversation didn't involve him. Roar, why don't you explain to your father? There was a steely edge to her voice. My son looked up at me wearily. Dad, it actually makes sense. It'll be easier for you to manage a smaller space, and we can start our own family life in my house. I didn't conceal my indignation. Our house. Britney corrected me. Roar is your only son and heir. In fact, he already owns this house.
The house belongs to me as long as he live.
I felt my blood boil at her audacity. But you're old, Chester, she said with such scorn that I recoiled. You have to consider the future.
We can't live forever in limbo, waiting for when.
When I die, I finished for her.
Don't twist my words, she grimaced.
I'm talking about the practical aspects. You're not young enough to make important decisions independently. You need support, and we're ready to provide it, but in return, we expect you to be understanding and cooperative. I looked at my son, searching his eyes for a flicker of resistance. But all I saw was resignation. Roar, do you agree with this?
You really want to force me out of my own home?
Dad, no one's forcing anyone, he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. We're just offering a better solution for everyone. For everyone, or for you? I asked directly. Stop being so dramatic. Britney slammed her palm on the table. I'm trying to create a normal family environment here, and you're resisting every step. Your outdated notions and stubbornness are hindering our life.
This house is as stuck in the last century as you are.
Britney, Roar said warningly, but she couldn't stop herself. No, let him hear the truth. She raised her voice. For 3 months, I've tolerated his peculiarities, his senile grumbling, his retired friends with their endless war stories. I've tried to create a cozy modern home here, and he clings to every piece of junk, every dusty trinket. It's unbearable. She finished her wine and continued, looking at me with undisguised contempt.
You know what, Chester?
I'm the lady of this house now, and you, old man, you're going to live by my rules. Either move into the guest house, or we'll find you a good place in a nursing home.
Roar agrees with me, don't you, dear?
My son sat as if paralyzed, unable to look at me or his wife.
He rose slowly from the table.
My heart pounded, and my hands trembled, not with fear, but with anger and resolve. For the first time in years, I felt the strength I'd possessed as a young man, when I'd defended my country in Vietnam, when I'd built a business from nothing, when I'd fought for Edith's life until my last breath. The house you reside in, I said firmly, looking Britney directly in the eye, does not belong to your husband, but to me. It has never been, and never will be, in Roar's name as long as I live. And given how you're treating me and the memory of my wife, you don't belong here. Prepare to move. Britney froze, mouth agape, disbelieving. Her face, usually so confident and haughty, contorted with shock and fury. You can't. She finally choked out. Roar, tell him. But my son remained silent, staring blankly ahead, as if only now comprehending his situation. You have 2 weeks to find a new residence, I added, heading out of the room. And don't even think about questioning my decision. Unlike you, Britney, I'm not bluffing. I exited, leaving them in the living room, and went upstairs to my bedroom. My legs were shaky, but I felt an unexpected lightness of heart. For the first time in 3 months, I felt in control of my life again, and I wasn't about to surrender. The next morning, I awoke to the unfamiliar sounds of someone preparing breakfast in my house. When I descended to the kitchen, I found Britney at the stove. She was dressed in elegant loungewear, her hair in a casual bun, but her makeup was already perfect. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "I thought I'd make French toast. Roar said you enjoy them." I did like French toast, but hers looked like an illustration from a gourmet magazine. Perfect, garnished with fresh berries and mint, yet utterly flavorless, all for appearance, nothing for the soul, much like Britney herself. All day long, she exerted herself to play the ideal daughter-in-law, showing interest in my hobbies, offering to assist around the house, even attempting to sort through my old stamp collection. But her eyes betrayed boredom and impatience, and her remarks were condescending, as if speaking to a petulant child rather than a mature man. That evening, as we sat on the porch, Roar finally revealed what I suspected was the true purpose of their visit. "Dad, Britney and I have been discussing the future extensively," he began, glancing nervously at his wife, who nodded approvingly. "And we were thinking perhaps we should move in with you.
You know, you're all alone here.
It's a large house. You probably need help." I froze, unable to process what I was hearing. Roar, who had barely found time to visit in recent years, suddenly wanted to live with me? What's the real reason for such concern? I asked directly, looking my son in the eye. He looked embarrassed, but Britney quickly intervened.
Mr.
"Blackwell, Roar and I are genuinely worried about you." Her voice was melodic, like a trained actress. "Living alone in such a large house at your age is a risk, and we could help you, keep you healthy, provide company. Besides," she paused, "we plan to have children soon. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have your grandchildren growing up with you?" The mention of potential grandchildren was a masterful tactic. I did dream of grandchildren, a chance to rectify the mistakes I'd made raising Roar, but something about the offer made me uneasy. "What about your apartment in Chicago and your job?" I asked a reasonable question. Roar lowered his eyes. "You see, Dad, I was laid off 3 months ago. The company was restructuring, and my position was eliminated. That was it."
The sudden decide to move, everything clicked into place.
"I've already found a new job here in Columbus," Roar quickly added. "I start in 2 weeks, and Britney can work remotely." "So, you just don't have a place to live?" I asked bluntly.
Chester.
Britney exclaimed with theatrical indignation. "How could you think that? We're worried about you. We want to be near you. Of course, we could rent or buy a house in Columbus, but wouldn't it be better to combine our efforts?"
A family soul de stick together.
I looked at my son, trying to discern what was truly happening in his life. He looked tired and lost, not at all like someone who had recently found marital bliss.
"Roar, can I speak with you for a moment?"
I gestured toward the house, wanting to be alone with him. Britney disliked the idea, but she offered an understanding smile and said she would go freshen up. When we were alone, I asked bluntly, "Son, what's truly going on? Why didn't you ever tell me you lost your job? And why the haste to marry and move?" Roar sighed, and for a moment, I saw the boy who used to confide in me before he grew distant.
"Dad, I truly love Britney.
She helped me when everything was falling apart. I was desperate after being fired, in debt, almost depressed, and she appeared and pulled me from that hole and offered me the solution to all my problems. Get married and move in with my wealthy father?" I said sarcastically. "No, it wasn't like that." Roar shook his head. "It was my idea to move in with you. We're genuinely concerned about you." And he paused, searching for words. "And yes, it will help us get back on our feet. But isn't it good for us to be close after all these years apart?" There was truth in his words. I did miss my son, and the thought of him living in this house again brought warmth to my soul. Maybe I was being too harsh on Britney. Maybe she truly loved Roar and wanted to help him. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "Give me time." The next few days became a strange charade. Britney tried to showcase her best self by cooking elaborate meals, though I preferred simple food, by suggesting we freshen up the interior, which meant discarding anything that reminded me of Edith, by discussing her garden plans. Despite the garden being Edith's pride, which I maintained exactly as she designed it. Roar, meanwhile, seemed increasingly anxious, as if he feared I would refuse them. I observed him fawning over Britney, hanging on her every word, and it troubled me. My son had always had his own opinions, but now he seemed to have completely dissolved into this woman. The last night before they left, they had to return to Chicago to finalize things before moving. I made a decision. "You can move in," I said over dinner, watching Britney's eyes gleam. "But on one condition: it's my house, and I'll make all the major decisions." "Of course, Mr. Blackwell." Britney smiled, her perfect smile. "We wouldn't dream of altering anything without your consent, would we, darling?" Roar nodded, visibly relieved. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it." But observing the triumphant glint in Britney's eyes, I began to second-guess my choice. Yet, I was doing it for my son. Perhaps a shared life would help us reconnect, to mend the relationship fractured by years of separation. And if Britney truly loved him, well, I was willing to try to get along with her. I didn't know then how much I would come to regret that decision. 3 months had passed since Roar and Britney moved into my home. 3 months that had transformed my orderly life into a constant struggle to preserve my dignity within my own space. For the initial weeks, things proceeded relatively smoothly. Britney exhibited exemplary politeness, cooked unusual dishes, though I preferred my usual fare, and sought my opinion on various matters. Roar took his new job, less prestigious than his previous one, but stable. He left early and returned late, leaving me alone with his wife. And that's when the real Britney began to surface. Without witnesses, she swiftly shed the facade of a caring daughter-in-law.
The first major conflict era uso ver my office.
It was my sanctuary, the room where I spent most of my day reading, working on my memoirs, or simply contemplating. My books, documents, collections, and mementos were stored there. One day, returning from an outing, I found the study door wide open. Inside, Britney was directing 2 workers who were removing my old desk, an antique piece I'd worked at my entire life.
"What's happening?" I demanded, feeling a surge of anger.
"Oh, Chester." Britney feigned joyful surprise. "I wanted to surprise you. This old desk isn't ergonomic at all, and it's probably causing your back pain. I've ordered a new, modern, height-adjustable one. I didn't give you permission to change anything in my office," I stated, trying to remain composed. She dismissed it with a wave, as if swatting an annoying fly.
"Come on, Chester. You can't live in the past forever."
"This house needs updating, and your office needs it first. That desk belongs in a museum, not a home. Put the desk back where it belongs," I told the workers, who exchanged uncertain glances. "Don't listen to him," Britney interjected with a cold smile. "Old people always resist change."
"Continue your work."
"This is my house, and I decide what changes I want," I said firmly. "Actually, it's our house now," Britney countered. "And I have a say in it, too. Roar and I have discussed it, and he agrees it's time for some changes." "You discussed changes to my office without me?" "We wanted it to be a surprise. Roar knows you're traditional and will oppose any alterations. So he thought it would be simpler this way." She flashed her artificial smile again.
"Trust us, Chester, we want what's best for you."
In the end, I insisted, and the desk was returned. But that was merely the first skirmish in a protracted war. Gradually, the house began to transform, not always with my consent.
First, Edith's pictures vanished from the living room.
Britney replaced them with contemporary abstract paintings, explaining that too many personal photos created a stifling atmosphere. Then she rearranged the furniture, discarded the old floor lamp Edith and I had bought during our first year of marriage, and replaced the curtains. Each time I expressed dissatisfaction, she parried with the same phrase, "Roar agrees with me." And indeed, my son seemed entirely subservient to his wife's wishes. He supported her every decision, even those that clearly wounded me. The house slowly ceased to be mine. All the items that reminded me of Edith disappeared one by one. Britney even attempted to remove Edith's clothes from my bedroom closet, asserting that it was time to move on. "You need to start dating women your own age," she declared one day over breakfast. "The senior club surely has suitable candidates." "I'm not interested in other women," I replied coolly. "It's unhealthy to cling to the past." She shook her head with feigned sympathy. Edith has been gone 5 years, Chester. She would have wanted you to move forward.
Don't you dare speak for my wife.
I rarely lost my temper, but at that moment, I could barely restrain myself. It wasn't just physical objects that were the issue. Britney was slowly altering the entire lifestyle of the house. My friends, who used to visit frequently, now felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. She criticized their rustic manners and scoffed at their anecdotes, labeling them senile ramblings. One day, Patrick, an old friend, arrived as usual on Thursday night for a chess game. Britney met him at the door with a false smile.
Chester's not feeling well tonight, Schilid. Perhaps another time.
I heard this from the kitchen and walked into the hallway.
I feel fine, Patrick.
Come on in, I said, ignoring Britney's furious glare. She created quite a scene after Patrick left. I'm trying to establish a normal family atmosphere here, and you bring in your old cronies every single day. She yelled. The house is becoming a nursing home. How can we start our family life if your friends are always present? They're my friends, and they'll always be welcome here, I stated firmly. And if you don't like it, you can find another place to live. We'll discuss it with Roar, she threatened. And true to her word, that evening, my son approached me for a serious talk. He looked weary and somewhat diminished. Dad, Britney's concerned there are too many unfamiliar faces in the house, he began hesitantly. Perhaps you could meet your friends elsewhere, a coffee shop or a park.
Son, do you hear yourself?
I looked him directly in the eye. Are you suggesting I banish my friends from my own home because your wife is uncomfortable? Britney's just very sensitive about personal space, he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. She needs time to adjust.
What about my space?
I asked. I allowed you to live in my house, but that doesn't mean I have to change my way of living. Dad, you have to understand. Britney and I need to build our family, our traditions. It's hard to do that with so many. He hesitated.
All.
I realized my son wasn't just referring to possessions or friends. He was talking about me. I was the old obstacle to their new life. Gradually, I began to feel like an outsider in my own residence. Britney organized dinner parties for her colleagues and acquaintances without seeking my permission. They filled the house with loud conversations, laughter, and the scent of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke. They introduced me as Roar's father, as if I were merely an attachment to the property rather than its proprietor. One day, I discovered the key to my office was missing. When I asked Britney about it, she feigned surprise. Why would you lock a room in your own house?
What are you concealing in there, Chester?
I value my privacy, I replied. You know, there should be no secrets in a family. She shook her head with feigned disappointment. Roar thinks you're becoming a little paranoid. It's normal at your age, but it might be worth consulting a specialist. I realized the key was not going to reappear, so I changed the lock. This provoked another argument. Britney claimed I didn't trust her, that I was undermining the family bond with my suspicions. Roar sided with her again, but the final straw was the night I found that the deeds to the house and my will were missing from the safe in the study. I asked Roar directly about it when we were alone. Son, did you take the papers from my safe? He hesitated, and that was confirmation enough. Britney wanted to see if everything was all right on the legal side. She's worried about the future. What future? I asked pointedly. Well, if something happens to you, you're not young anymore, Dad, and we have to be prepared. I didn't let him finish. The documents must be returned to the safe by tonight. And tell your wife that my personal belongings are none of her concern. Roar nodded, but I saw fear in his eyes, not for me, but for Britney's reaction. The documents were back in the safe, but I noticed scanning marks on them. They weren't folded as I'd left them. It made me wonder what other schemes my daughter-in-law was concocting. And then today, after 3 months of this exhausting conflict, things finally reached a breaking point. Britney announced a family dinner. She cooked a gourmet meal, set the table in the living room instead of our usual kitchen, lit candles, and opened a bottle of costly wine. "Are we having a celebration?" I asked, not grasping the reason for such formality. "You could say that." She smiled mysteriously. "Today marks exactly 3 months since we started living together. I think it's time to review our progress." Dinner began relatively calmly. Britney asked Roar about his work, shared her successes in organizing a PR campaign. I ate in silence, observing them, feeling like an extra in their life's grand production.
After the second glass of wine, Britney got to the evening's main agenda.
"Chester, Roar and I have had a long discussion and decided it's time for some adjustments," she said in a businesslike tone, like a corporate meeting. "It's becoming increasingly difficult for you to manage such a large house. We see how tired you get climbing the stairs, how hard it is for you to maintain order." "I'm managing just fine," I protested. "There's no need to be brave," she smiled indulgently. "We all age. Anyway, we thought it would be more sensible if you moved into the guest house in the garden. It's small, cozy, all on one level, no stairs, and we'd take care of the main house." I couldn't believe my ears. They were suggesting I move out of my own home into a small annex in the garden. The guest house was essentially a garden shed I had converted into a tiny studio for visiting relatives. It had only one room with a kitchenette and a small bathroom.
"This is my home," he said slowly. "I'm not going anywhere."
"Chester, be reasonable." Britney frowned. "You're 74 years old. At your age, it's risky to live alone in a big house. This way, we'll be nearby to keep an eye on you."
"I don't need supervision."
"That's what everyone says until they fall and break a hip." She laughed as if she'd said something witty. "Besides, Roar and I need more space. We're planning on children, and we'll need extra rooms." "Roar's nursery is still upstairs," I pointed out. "It's empty. One room isn't enough," Britney stated.
"We need a nursery, a playroom, my workspace."
"This house was designed for a family, and you're occupying it alone. It's unsustainable." "This house is mine," I repeated.
"And I'm not moving anywhere."
She glanced at Roar, who sat with his eyes fixed on his plate, as if the conversation didn't involve him. "Roar, why don't you explain to your father?" There was a steely edge to her voice. My son looked up at me wearily. "Dad, it actually makes sense. It'll be easier for you to manage a smaller space, and we can start our own family life in my house." I didn't conceal my indignation. "Our house." Britney corrected me. "Roar is your only son and heir. In fact, he already owns this house."
"The house belongs to me as long as he lives."
I felt my blood boil at her audacity. "But you're old, Chester," she said with such scorn that I recoiled. "You have to consider the future."
"We can't live forever in limbo, waiting for when."
"When I die," I finished for her.
"Don't twist my words," she grimaced.
"I'm talking about the practical aspects. You're not young enough to make important decisions independently. You need support, and we're ready to provide it, but in return, we expect you to be understanding and cooperative." I looked at my son, searching his eyes for a flicker of resistance. But all I saw was resignation. "Roar, do you agree with this?"
"You really want to force me out of my own home?"
"Dad, no one's forcing anyone," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "We're just offering a better solution for everyone." "For everyone, or for you?" I asked directly. "Stop being so dramatic." Britney slammed her palm on the table. "I'm trying to create a normal family environment here, and you're resisting every step. Your outdated notions and stubbornness are hindering our life."
"This house is as stuck in the last century as you are."
"Britney," Roar said warningly, but she couldn't stop herself. "No, let him hear the truth." She raised her voice. "For 3 months, I've tolerated his peculiarities, his senile grumbling, his retired friends with their endless war stories. I've tried to create a cozy modern home here, and he clings to every piece of junk, every dusty trinket. It's unbearable. She finished her wine and continued, looking at me with undisguised contempt.
You know what, Chester?
I'm the lady of this house now, and you, old man, you're going to live by my rules. Either move into the guest house, or we'll find you a good place in a nursing home.
Roar gris with me, don't you, dear?
My son sat as if paralyzed, unable to look at me or his wife.
Y roces lo uli from the table.
My heart pounded, and my hands trembled, not with fear, but with anger and resolve. For the first time in years, I felt the strength I'd possessed as a young man, when I'd defended my country in Vietnam, when I'd built a business from nothing, when I'd fought for Edith's life until my last breath. The house you reside in, I said firmly, looking Britney directly in the eye, does not belong to your husband but to me. It has never been, and never will be, in Roar's name as long as I live. And given how you're treating me and the memory of my wife, you don't belong here. Prepare to move. Britney froze, mouth agape, disbelieving. Her face, usually so confident and haughty, contorted with shock and fury. You can't, she finally choked out. Roar, tell him. But my son remained silent, staring blankly ahead, as if only now comprehending his situation. You have 2 weeks to find a new residence, I added, heading out of the room. And don't even think about questioning my decision. Unlike you, Britney, I'm not bluffing. I exited, leaving them in the living room, and went upstairs to my bedroom. My legs were shaky, but I felt an unexpected lightness of heart. For the first time in 3 months, I felt in control of my life again, and I wasn't about to surrender. The next morning was unusually quiet. I woke earlier than usual, before 6, and went down to the kitchen. To my surprise, no one was there. Typically by this hour, Britney was already bustling about, making her elaborate avocado and quinoa breakfast.
I brewed coffee and sat by the window, washing the garden slowly a backen with the rising sun.
I didn't regret yesterday's confrontation. On the contrary, I felt satisfied that I'd finally articulated everything that had been accumulating for months. Perhaps I should have acted sooner, not allowed the situation to escalate this far. But now was the opportunity to set things right, to reclaim command of my own life and home. Around 8 a.m., Roar entered the kitchen. He looked drained, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," I said, pouring him a cup of coffee. He nodded, avoiding my gaze, and sat opposite me. "Dad, we need to discuss yesterday." I had been anticipating this conversation, and was prepared.
I'm listening.
What Britney said. She didn't mean it, he began uncertainly. She was just overwhelmed. Working, moving, adjusting. It's all exhausting. She was quite explicit, I countered. And this isn't the first time she's revealed her true feelings about me in this house. Roar ran a hand through his hair, a habit he'd adopted from me, always used when nervous. She truly is sorry. We both are. Yesterday was a difficult day. Everyone said too much. He paused. But evicting us.
It's a bit extreme, don't you think?
I think I provided you a place to stay when you needed it. And instead of gratitude, I received attempts to remove me from my own home, I said calmly but firmly. This isn't about one difficult day, Roar. It's about respect, which your wife clearly has neither for me nor for your mother's memory. She just doesn't understand some things. He looked almost pleading.
Britney grew up in a different environment.
She has different values.
He had another chance, Dad.
For me.
What about you?
I asked directly. Do you believe I should move into the guest house and give you the main house, too? Roar lowered his eyes, and in that moment, he resembled a small boy caught in a lie. No, of course not. I never intended to evict you. But, Dad, please understand, our situation isn't easy.
What situation, Roar? He leaned in closer.
Perhaps it's time you told me the truth. He sighed, and after a long silence, he began to speak. And what I heard confirmed my gravest suspicions. It turned out that Roar's financial difficulties were far more severe than he had previously admitted. After being laid off, he'd been subsisting on rapidly dwindling savings. Then he began taking out loans, small at first, then progressively larger. By the time he met Britney, his debt was already substantial. And Britney agreed to marry you knowing your financial state? I asked, not concealing my skepticism. She said we could manage it together, Roar said quietly, as if struggling to believe his own words. Britney suggested moving in with you to save on rent and pay off the debt quicker, but then she found out how much the house was worth. I finished for him. Roar nodded, and it pained me to realize how naive my son had been. She started saying that if the house was in my name, we could get a loan against it and solve all our financial problems, or sell it and buy 2 smaller homes, one for us and one for you.
Y talma de sense now.
Britney's interest in the paperwork, her insistence on updating the interior, read, increasing market value, her comments about my advanced age and inability to live alone. She was meticulously preparing the ground to seize control of the house. And you went along with this scheme? I asked, feeling a cold dread at the thought of my son's complicity. No, I told her that the house belonged to you, and we had no right to demand anything. But she insisted we should at least discuss that option. He rubbed his temples as if getting a migraine. I never meant for it to end this way, Dad. I swear. I looked at my son and saw a frightened boy trapped by his own weakness. Perhaps I truly had been too hard on him as a child, pressured him so much with my expectations that he developed an inferiority complex. Or was his gentleness due to Edith, who always shielded him from my demanding nature? How much do you owe? I asked after a long pause. Roar named the sum, and I whistled. It was considerable, but not insurmountable. I could have helped him if only he'd asked sooner, before all the Britney complications. Why didn't you come to me? There was bitterness in my voice.
I'm your father, Roar.
I've always been there for you. I didn't want to be a burden. He looked ashamed. You've been through enough since your mother died. And then he stopped speaking, but I understood what he wasn't saying. And then Britney arrived and offered a different solution. I finished for him. Our conversation was interrupted by Britney's entrance. She walked into the kitchen looking entirely different than usual. No makeup, her hair in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest sweater and jeans instead of her typical designer clothes. There was a look of feigned remorse on her face, so slight I almost chuckled. Good morning, she said quietly, almost shyly.
Mai join you.
I nodded, and she sat next to Roar, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support. Chester, I wanted to apologize for yesterday, she began, looking at me with moist eyes. I said some awful things I never truly meant. It was a moment of weakness, and I'm very, very sorry. I stared at her in silence, waiting for this performance to continue. I never intended to drive you out of the house, she continued. On the contrary, I wanted to create a warm family atmosphere here for all of us. Perhaps I was too zealous with the changes. Didn't consider your feelings. I admit my mistake, and I apologize. And you no longer think of me as a helpless old man who should be relocated to the shed? I asked ironically, which she ignored. Of course not.
I respect you, Chester.
She placed her hand on my palm in a false show of sincerity. You've done so much for Roar, for this family. I've been ungrateful, and I'm asking you to give me a chance to make amends. I looked at my son, who was watching the scene with hope in his eyes, and I felt pity for him. He genuinely believed in his wife's sincerity, blind to the manipulation behind her beautiful words. We can start fresh, Britney suggested with a smile that seemed almost genuine. I promise to be more considerate of your wishes and the traditions of this house. I knew she was lying. Knew it was just a new tactic to remain in the house and pursue her scheme. But I also knew that Roar wasn't ready to end his relationship with her. He was too confused, too dependent. All right, I said after a long pause.
Let's try again.
But on one condition, no changes to the house without my consent. No talk of moving or remodeling, and my friends can visit any time. Certainly, Chester, she brightened, but I could still see the calculation in her eyes.
Whatever you say, it's your home.
Roar looked relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Poor boy. He truly thought it was all so simple. After breakfast, he left for work, and it was just Britney and me. As soon as the door closed behind my son, her face transformed. The mask of remorse vanished, replaced by cold calculation. I'm truly sorry about last night, Chester, she said. But there was no trace of pleading in her voice now. It was a tactical error. I was too hasty. At least you're honest now, I noted with a bitter chuckle. Always, she smiled, her characteristic shark-like grin.
Let's be clear.
I know you don't trust me, and frankly, I'm not fond of you either. But Roar loves us both. And for his sake, we have to find a way to coexist. Until you find a way to get rid of me?
Oh, Chester, you're so dramatic.
She laughed.
I'm not going to kill you, if that's what you mean.
I just think that at your age, it's time to consider a more compact place to live.
This conversation is over.
I stood up, intending to depart. Not quite. She stopped me with a gesture. Did Roar tell you about our financial problems? I nodded, seeing no point in denying it. Then you understand why it's so important for us to remain here. We can't afford to rent until we pay off our debts. I offered to help Roar, I said. Of course you did, she nodded with feigned gratitude. But you want him to do it on his own, don't you? To be a real man, not a mummy's boy. She knew exactly where to strike. Of course, I wanted my son to be independent, strong, confident, but he hadn't been that way in a long time, and it was largely because of this woman. Give us time, Chester, Britney continued. Let us stay here until we get back on our feet, and then I promise we'll find our own place. I looked at her skeptically.
Why so do you believe your promises?
Because I'm going to play by your rules now, she shrugged. At least for now. That was the end of our discussion. But I knew this was just the beginning of a new phase of the conflict. Britney hadn't abandoned her plans, she had simply altered her strategy. Over the next few days, she exhibited exemplary behavior. She cooked my preferred meals, sought my opinion on various subjects, even offered to return Edith's pictures to the living room. Roar was delighted with the change, believing that the crisis had passed and that now we could truly live as one happy family. But I noticed something my son didn't. As soon as we were alone, Britney dropped her act. Nothing overtly hostile, just a cold, assessing stare, snide remarks delivered in passing, hints about my age and health. She never gave up trying to erode my self-confidence, to make me feel like a burden. And then came the most dangerous part. She began to turn Roar against me, but she did it so subtly that he didn't even perceive the manipulation. Your father looks so tired today, she said with feigned concern. Don't you think he should see a doctor? Maybe he has a heart problem or dementia. Or, I've noticed Chester's been forgetful lately. Yesterday, he couldn't remember where he put his glasses, and today he forgot to turn off the gas. Is that normal for his age? And Roar, instead of dismissing these insinuations, began to worry. I could see the change in his eyes when he looked at me, an anxiety, as if he expected me to become senile or suffer a heart attack at any moment. One evening, he came into my office with papers in his hands. Dad, I was thinking, maybe we should get a power of attorney, he started tentatively, in case something happens to you and you can't make decisions for yourself. I looked at him in disbelief. Something like your wife convincing you that I was on the verge of dementia? He blushed but didn't back down. No, of course not.
It's just a sensible precaution.
Britney says that's what her family always did. Her family, I repeated. Not in ours.
I'm in my right mind, Roar.
And I intend to remain that way for years to come. But if anything happens, I have a will and all the necessary papers with my lawyer, I said. And believe me, I've thought of everything. He walked away disappointed, and I was left pondering how deeply Britney's influence over my son had penetrated. She was methodically destroying our bond, driving a wedge between us, and doing it under the guise of caring for both of us. A week after our last confrontation, I happened to overhear their conversation in the kitchen. I wasn't intending to eavesdrop. I was just walking by and stopped when I heard my name. He's getting more and more suspicious, Britney said. Have you noticed how he's watching my every move? It's not normal, Roar. He's just worried about his home, replied my son. Give him time to get used to it. Time. There was anger in her voice. How much more time do we have to live as tenants in a house that should rightfully belong to you? You're his only son. It's his house, Britney. He earned it. He paid the mortgage. And you are his heir. She wouldn't give up. He won't even discuss his plans for the house with you. Are you sure he hasn't decided to sign it over to some cat shelter? Dad, never. You don't know what's in his head, she interrupted. Old people can be very strange, especially when they live alone. Maybe he's already made a will for his friend Patrick or that nurse at the clinic who flirts so sweetly with him. Britney, come on, Roar's voice sounded tired. I'm just saying we need to be certain about the future. We have debts, Roar. Huge debts. And our only hope is this house. We'll get through this, he said, but without much conviction. How? Her voice became sharper. Your new job barely covers the interest on your loans. We'll never escape debt if we just drift along. We need a plan. We need guarantees. I didn't listen any further, and quietly went to my office. Now, I knew for certain that Britney hadn't abandoned her schemes. She had simply chosen a different approach, through her son, through his fears and insecurities. And I knew I had to act before it was too late. Before my son finally became a puppet in the hands of this manipulative woman. After overhearing the conversation, I began to observe Britney and Roar more closely. Their behavior increasingly concerned me. Britney continued to play the role of caring daughter-in-law in my presence. But as soon as I left the room, her voice changed, becoming harsh and demanding. Roar, on the other hand, seemed more and more nervous, avoiding direct conversation with me, and rarely making eye contact. One morning, when they were both out, Roar at work and Britney at some business meeting, I decided to do a little investigation. I usually respected others' privacy and never entered their room uninvited, but my intuition told me it was time to break that rule. Their bedroom, formerly the guest room, was now redecorated to Britney's taste. Minimalist furniture, cool gray-blue tones, no personal photos or mementos. I looked around, not knowing exactly what I was searching for. A closet with Britney's perfectly arranged outfits, a dresser with makeup, a bedside table with a self-help book she'd conspicuously read in the evenings. On a table by the window sat Britney's laptop. I knew it was password protected, but her work folder of documents lay beside it. I opened it, feeling a pang of guilt. It was an intrusion, after all, but my unease was quickly replaced by shock. The folder contained printouts of advertisements for houses for sale in our neighborhood, with handwritten notes like, similar to ours, sold for, same year built, worth. Among them was a sheet with budget sketches where, in the income column, was an amount astonishingly close to the market value of my house. But the true revelation was a folder labeled, Plan CB. Inside, I found a meticulously organized document titled, Inheritance Strategy. With each paragraph I read, my heart tightened further. Britney had compiled a detailed action plan for the event of my death. It outlined the steps to sell the house quickly, the anticipated profit, and investment options for the proceeds. One point explicitly stated, the sale should be made as soon as possible after CB's death, while Roar is emotionally vulnerable and not inclined to resist. It went on to describe the need to convince CB to rewrite the will in Roar's favor and alternative means of gaining control of the estate in the event of CB's incapacity. At the document's end was a handwritten comment, "Power of attorney option is a priority. Get it signed by the end of the month."
I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a chill spread through me.
This wasn't just a plan. It was a strategy to seize my assets. And from the looks of it, my own son was, if not complicit, at least aware of these plans. After taking a few pictures of the documents on my phone, I carefully replaced everything and left the room. I needed counsel, and I knew whom to approach. Franklin Whitley had been my friend since military service. After Vietnam, he had attended law school, and now, despite his advanced age, he continued to offer legal advice. We met every Wednesday at the Veterans Club, but today was only Monday. The situation was urgent. I called him, and to my relief, Franklin agreed to meet the same day. We decided to have lunch at a small restaurant in the business district, away from the house. I didn't want to risk a chance encounter with Britney or her associates. Franklin listened to my account with his characteristic composure. He examined the pictures on my phone, asked a few clarifying questions, and finally leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table, a gesture he always used when contemplating a complex issue. "The situation is grave, Chester," he said at last. "What your daughter-in-law is doing could be classified as attempted fraud, especially these plans to have you declared incompetent. What is your recommendation?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. "First, amend your will immediately," he spoke like a lawyer now, clear and concise. "If you don't want Roar and his wife to have the house, you'll have to make that explicit in the document." "But he's my only son," I objected.
"Who else can I leave my inheritance to?"
"There are alternatives," Franklin began to list. "You can establish a trust with certain stipulations. For example, Roar would only receive the house after he divorces Britney. Or you could bequeath the house to a charitable organization and leave Roar financial compensation." I considered this. The idea of disinheriting my son felt too cruel, but leaving the house to Britney was even worse. Edith had poured her heart and soul into it, and the thought of it being sold after my death was unbearable. "There's another dimension to the problem," Franklin continued. "You need to safeguard yourself against potential attempts to have you declared incompetent. I would advise a comprehensive medical examination right now to officially document your excellent mental health." "Do you truly think they would go that far?" I asked, though after reading Plan CB, I had no doubts. "Judging by the documents, your daughter-in-law is prepared for a great deal," Franklin was brutally honest. "And the second question is, what to do about them residing in your house." I sighed. This was the moment of truth. "I want them to move out," I said firmly. "But Roar, he's my son, Frank, and he has serious financial problems." "Which shouldn't be your burden." My friend shook his head. "Look, Chester, I know you care for your son, but sometimes the best assistance is to let a man face the repercussions of his choices, including the choice to tie his life to this woman." He was right, and I knew it, but that didn't make it any easier. "What about a formal eviction?" I asked. "What's the process?" "Given that you don't have a written lease, you can simply issue them a notice to vacate the premises. Typically, you allow 30 days. If they refuse, you'll have to go to court, but I doubt it will reach that point." We discussed the specifics, and by the end of the meeting, I had a clear course of action. Franklin promised to prepare all necessary paperwork within a few days, and we arranged to meet again. Returning home, I felt a strange blend of determination and bitterness. In my entire life, I had never imagined I would be forced to formally evict my own son. Where had I erred in his upbringing? Why had he grown so susceptible, unable to resist the manipulations of a calculating woman? At home, an unpleasant surprise awaited me. Roar and Britney were seated in the living room, accompanied by a man in a business suit I'd never seen.
Oh, there you are, Dad.
Roar looked anxious. I'd like you to meet Dr. Harris, a gerontology specialist. Gerontology? I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine.
Yes, Mr. Blackwell.
The man stood and extended his hand. I specialize in the health of the elderly. Your son and his wife have expressed concern about your condition. My condition? I repeated, not masking my sarcasm. And what are their specific worries? Dr. Harris looked slightly uncomfortable. They noted some indicators that might suggest the early stages of cognitive decline. Forgetfulness, mood changes, suspiciousness. Suspicious? I nodded, looking directly at Britney, who was doing her best to appear worried. I wonder why I've become suspicious. See, doctor, she turned to the specialist. He immediately becomes hostile, even though we only want to help. I looked at my son, who was avoiding my gaze. Roar, was this your idea or hers? I asked bluntly. Dad, we're both worried, he said quietly, uncertainly. You've been forgetful, sometimes mixing up the days of the week.
When have you ever confused the days of the week?
I demanded an answer. Last week, you thought it was Thursday when it was Wednesday, Britney interjected. And you couldn't find your glasses even though they were right in front of you. I recalled that incident. The glasses were on the table, but Britney failed to mention she'd moved them there, even though I always left them on my bedside table. Dr. Harris, I addressed the specialist, trying to speak calmly and logically. I appreciate your concern, but I assure you that there is nothing wrong with my cognitive health. I just returned from my attorney, with whom I discussed changes to my will. If you'd like, I can show you the notes from our meeting, which I took from memory without any prompts. Britney tensed upon hearing about the will. What changes to the will? She asked, unable to conceal her alarm. It's confidential, I answered, looking her straight in the eye. But I can tell you that I am being very careful about the inheritance of my estate. Dr. Harris seemed uneasy being caught in the middle of a family dispute. Perhaps I should return another time when the situation is calmer, he suggested, rising.
No need, doctor, I shook my head.
I'm perfectly willing to undergo any examination right now, but on one condition, the results will be sent directly to me and my lawyer, bypassing my son and his wife. Britney clearly hadn't anticipated this. But we're family, she objected. We have a right to know about your condition. That's precisely why I'm suggesting you get a checkup, I countered.
To alleviate your fears.
After Dr. Harris left, promising to contact me to schedule a formal examination, it was just the three of us. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Why did you change your will? Roar asked directly.
Why did you invite a specialist in senile dementia without my knowledge?
I answered question for question. We were worried. Britney reverted to caring daughter-in-law mode. Your behavior lately? My behavior is entirely appropriate to the circumstances.
He interrupted.
Especially considering what I discovered in your work folder today, Britney. She turned pale but quickly regained her composure. You went through my things? Her voice turned icy. That's a violation of privacy. And planning to sell my house right after my death is what? I couldn't hold back. Plan CB is a rather transparent acronym, don't you think? Roar looked confused. What's he talking about? He asked, looking at his wife. I have no idea, she shrugged with feigned incomprehension. Apparently, this paranoia is more serious than we initially thought. Don't try to make me look crazy. I pulled out my phone and showed my son the pictures of the documents.
Here, see for yourself.
Your wife has concocted a detailed plan to sell the house after my death. She's even contemplating declaring me incompetent so she can gain control of the property while I'm still alive. Roar looked at the photos, his face growing more and more shocked with each image.
Britney, what is this?
His voice trembled. They're just drafts, she tried to maintain her composure. I work with real estate. I do budget planning. These are all hypothetical scenarios. The sale should be made as soon as possible after CB's death while Roar is emotionally vulnerable, I quoted. A very hypothetical scenario, isn't it? Britney realized it was futile to deny and abruptly changed tactics. Okay, yes, I've planned our financial strategy for the future. She was now addressing Roar, completely ignoring me. But only because we're in desperate straits. We have massive debts that your father could easily cover. But instead, he'd rather watch us drown. I offered to help, I reminded her, but not on your terms. What terms? Roar was now utterly bewildered. Your wife wants me either dead or incapacitated, I said bluntly. In either case, you will get the house, which she will sell immediately. That's not true, Britney shouted, but her eyes betrayed her panic. I was just considering all the options. It's called planning. Roar looked utterly devastated. Did you really write about emotional vulnerability? He asked quietly. Britney realized she'd lost this round, and she changed tactics abruptly. Yes, I did. She wasn't pretending anymore. Because you're weak, Roar. You've never been good at making tough decisions. Someone had to take care of our future, and that someone was me. I watched this scene with a heavy heart. My son looked completely crushed, and I could almost physically feel his pain. I thought you loved me, he said so softly that Britney had to lean closer. I do, she exclaimed, but her voice sounded coldly calculating rather than passionate. But love doesn't pay the bills, Roar. We need money, stability, a future. At the expense of my father's death? He looked up at her, shocked. He's old anyway. She cut him off, losing the last vestiges of pretense. What's wrong with us inheriting what should rightfully be yours? It's the natural order of things. There was a heavy silence. I looked at my son, waiting for his reaction, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. Love for this woman battling the shock of realizing her true nature. I think we all need to calm down, Roar finally said, rising. I need to think. He left the room, and Britney and I were alone. She was staring at me with undisguised hatred. You ruined everything, she hissed. We could have had a good arrangement. You could have lived out your days in peace, and we could have managed the house amicably. I grinned bitterly. Your definition of nice is very peculiar, Britney. She got up to leave, but I stopped her.
Ibe chante will.
The house will never be yours, even if you stay with Roar. And you have 2 weeks to move out. I've prepared a formal eviction notice. You can't do this to your own son. She clenched her fists in anger. I'm doing this for my son, I replied calmly. And it's probably the best thing I've done for him. When Britney left, I sat in the empty living room for a long time, reflecting on what had transpired. The pain of realizing that my own son had allowed this woman to plan my death or incapacitation was unbearable. But it was even more painful to see him torn between his loyalty to me and his feelings for her. I pulled an old photograph from my desk drawer, Roar at 5 years old on my shoulders, both of us laughing, happy and carefree. Where had those times gone? When did we become such strangers to each other? That night, I drafted the official eviction notice, as Franklin and I had agreed. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was necessary, not only for my protection but for Roar's as well. He needed to break free of this woman's influence, even if it meant enduring pain and loss. I didn't know if my son would ever forgive me for that decision, but I firmly believed I was doing the right thing, protecting not only myself and the memory of Edith, but Roar himself from his own weakness.
The next morning, after the revelation of Britney's schemes, an oppressive silence soon in the house.
Roar had gone to work earlier than usual, skipping breakfast. Britney locked herself in her bedroom, feigning remote work. I sat in the kitchen, rereading the eviction notice I'd prepared the day before. 2 copies, one for Roar and one for Britney, an official document giving them 14 days to vacate the premises. Franklin assured me that legally everything was impeccable. They weren't tenants in the classic sense, they hadn't paid rent, hadn't signed a contract. In fact, they were guests whom I had every right to ask to leave. I decided to serve the notice in the evening when they would both be home. The day dragged on agonizingly. I tried to distract myself by reading, taking a walk, even calling Patrick to discuss a chess game, but my thoughts kept returning to the impending conversation. How would Roar react? Would he realize that I wasn't doing this out of spite, but for his own welfare? Or would he turn his back on me, choosing his wife's side? Around 6 p.m., I heard the door open, and Roar returned. An hour later, Britney arrived, and judging by the sound of her heels on the stairs, she went straight up to the bedroom. I gave them time to change and compose themselves, then called them both into the living room. They entered wearily, as if anticipating trouble. Britney looked as perfect as ever, not a hair out of place, her makeup flawless, but anxiety etched her eyes. Roar, conversely, looked haggard, his face drawn, eyes red from lack of sleep, shoulders slumped. "Have a seat," I said, pointing to the couch. They sat next to each other, but not close.
A palpable tensión existed between them.
A good sign, I thought. It means Roar still harbors doubts. "I've been contemplating this situation for a long time," I began, trying to speak calmly and rationally. "And I've reached the conclusion that it's better for us to separate." Britney leaned forward, ready to object, but I stopped her with a gesture.
"Let me finish."
"After last night, it's clear to me that we cannot live under the same roof. Trust is shattered, and there's no way to rebuild it." "Dad." Roar finally looked up at me.
"What you found. It's not what you think."
"Britney's just." "Let's not deceive each other, son," I interrupted gently. "We all know it was exactly what it seemed, a plan to gain control of my house after I'm dead or incapacitated."
"You've got it all wrong."
Britney exclaimed, adopting an air of outraged innocence. "I was just analyzing possible scenarios. That's part of my job. I would never."
"That's enough. Erased my hand."
"I don't want to hear another lie. Here." I handed them the envelopes with the notices. An official demand to vacate the premises within 14 days. Britney jumped up, her face contorted with rage.
"You can't do this."
"We're family." She turned to Roar. "Tell him this is your home, too." Roar took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. "Dad, you can't seriously want this," he said quietly. "I can and I do," I said firmly.
"This is my house.
I built it.
I paid for it.
And I decide who lives in it. But I'm your son." There was resentment in his voice. "Yes, you are my son," I sighed. "And that's why it pains me so much to see what your life has become. You let that woman," I nodded toward Britney, "manipulate you, turn you against your own father, plan my death."
I never planned your death."
Britney shrieked.
"This is slander."
"I'm going to sue."
"Go ahead, Israel."
"I have pictures of your documents, witness statements, and a great lawyer. It's going to be a very interesting trial." She was silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Roar looked utterly lost. "Where shall we go?" he asked in a lifeless voice. "We don't have any money for rent." "I have a proposal," I said, softening my tone. "I'm willing to help you financially, Roar. Pay for your move, put a down payment on your rent, even help you with your debts, but on one condition." "What's that?" He looked up at me with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You go to a financial counselor and a therapist," I answered bluntly. "You need help, son. Professional help." Britney laughed, cold and contemptuous. "That's it. You want to control him like you've been controlling him his whole life." She turned to Roar. "See," He thinks you're weak, inferior. He's always thought that. I could see that her words had struck a nerve with Roar. That's what she was counting on, his old complexes and insecurities. I don't think you're weak, I said, looking my son straight in the eye. I think you're under the influence of a woman who doesn't love you, but uses you, and I want to help you out of that trap. Roar sat with his head down, clearly torn between the two forces pulling him in different directions. We need to talk in private, I said, nodding toward the study. Without her. Britney jumped up immediately. Don't even think about it, she hissed. Roar and I are family. We have no secrets from each other. That's not for you to decide, I said calmly.
Roar.
My son rose slowly, not looking at his wife.
Ella talk to my father.
If you leave this room now, you don't have to come back. Britney turned to shouting. It's your choice, Roar. It's either me or him. Roar froze and then, to my relief, headed for the study door. I followed him, leaving Britney seething with rage in the living room. In the study, we sat across from each other, just like the old days when I'd help him with his homework or explain why he shouldn't skip school. She's not who she claims to be, I began bluntly.
You saw the documents.
She was planning on using you to acquire my house.
You don't understand.
Roar shook his head. Britney is just being pragmatic. She's thinking about the future. Her future, not yours, I countered.
Roar, look at yourself.
You've changed since she entered your life. You're nervous, insecure, constantly seeking her approval. It's not a healthy relationship. You just don't comprehend her, he repeated stubbornly. But his voice wasn't as confident as before. Then explain it to me. I leaned forward. Explain to me why your wife was planning to sell the house right after I died. Why was she considering declaring me incompetent? Why did she try to isolate me from my friends, alter my habits, control my life? Roar was silent, unable to find an answer. Son, I'm not asking you to choose between us, I continued more gently. Instead, I'm asking you to confront the truth. She's exploiting you, and she'll continue to exploit you as long as she needs you. She loves me, he mumbled, but he sounded unconvinced. Does she?
I shook my head. Remember how you met her?
You were in a vulnerable position, lost your job, struggling financially, the perfect target for a woman like her. He looked up at me, and there was pain in his eyes.
What do I do, Dad?
I'm confused. Walk away from her, I said simply.
Start your life over.
I'll help you with money, get you a good therapist, a financial counselor. You can get back on your feet. Roar was silent for a long time, pondering my words. I could see that he was struggling internally, and I hoped that reason would prevail over emotional dependence. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked up at me wearily. I can't, Dad. I can't just walk away from her. Why not? I didn't hide my disappointment. Because, he hesitated, trying to find the words, because I really love her, no matter what. And then she's right about one thing. I'm weak. I've always been weak. You know that.
You're not weak, Roar. I shook my head.
You're just misled.
You let her convince you of your own weakness.
No, Dad. I've always been like that, he said bitterly. Always seeking approval, always afraid to make decisions. You wanted me to be strong like you, but I'm not. I never have been. His words hurt me, almost physically. Had I been so wrong in raising my son? So pressured him with my expectations that he grew up with an inferiority complex? I love you just the way you are, son, I said quietly. I always have.
And all I want now is for you to be happy.
Truly happy.
Not dependent on a woman who manipulates your fears.
Maybe you're right about Britney. He suddenly smiled a sad smile. Maybe she really is using me. But you know what, Dad? I don't care. She makes me feel needed. She gives me a purpose, a direction, even if that purpose is just to serve her interests. I looked at my son and I didn't recognize him. Where was that smart, ambitious boy who dreamed of changing the world? When did he transform into this broken man willing to settle for being a puppet? That's not love, Roar, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. It's an addiction. An unhealthy, destructive addiction. Maybe, he shrugged. But it's all I have. We walked back to the living room where Britney was pacing impatiently. When she saw our faces, she realized that I hadn't been able to change Roar's mind. Have you had enough talking? She asked with ill-concealed triumph.
Habe you made your decisión?
We'll leave as you demand, Roar said without looking at me. We'll find another place to live. But the terms of assistance still apply, I added. I'll help with the move and the down payment if you agree to counseling. We don't need your help. Britney jumped up. We can manage this on our own.
I'm not talking to you.
I'm talking to my son. I cut her off.
Roar.
He stood with his head down, clearly unwilling to choose between us. I'll think about your offer, he said at last. But now we must find lodgings. You have 14 days. I nodded at the envelopes of notices that were still on the coffee table. I hope that's enough time. Britney grabbed her envelope, ripped it open defiantly, and threw the scraps on the floor. Go to hell, old man, she hissed, losing the last vestiges of her composure. You're going to regret this. Both of us, she nodded at Roar, are going to make you regret it. With those words, she ran out of the room, slamming the door loudly. Roar stood looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of regret, shame, and perhaps relief. I'm sorry for her, he said quietly. She's just upset. You deserve better, son, I replied, feeling my heart clench with pain. And one day you'll realize that. He nodded, picked up his envelope, and walked out without looking back. The next 2 weeks passed in tense anticipation. Roar and Britney were rarely home, searching for a new place to live, I assumed. When we did cross paths, the atmosphere was so heavy that I preferred to retreat to the study or go for a walk. Britney defiantly ignored me, and if she spoke, it was only in sharp remarks. Roar remained distant, absorbed in his own thoughts. I tried several times to speak with him alone, but he avoided lengthy conversations. 3 days before the notice period expired, Roar informed me that they had found an apartment and would be moving that weekend. It's small, but it'll do for now, he said, looking me in the eye for the first time in a long while. And I got a second job in the evenings. It won't be easy, but we'll manage. My offer to help still stands, I reminded him. No strings attached if you're not ready for counseling. He shook his head. Thanks, Dad, but we have to do this on our own. Britney was right about one thing. It was time for me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. The day of the move, I purposely left the house so I wouldn't interfere or create additional stress. When I returned in the evening, I found the house empty and unusually silent. They had taken only personal belongings, leaving all the furniture and appliances. On the kitchen table were the keys and a short note from Roar, "Thanks for everything.
Eché call you." He sat down in the chair, feeling a strange blend of relief and sadness.
On one hand, I had finally regained control of my own life and home. On the other, I had lost my son, possibly forever. But I didn't regret the decision. Sometimes you have to endure pain to break a deadlock. Roar had to realize for himself what an unhealthy relationship he was in and find the strength to change his life. I couldn't do that for him, no matter how much I wished I could. I spent the next few days restoring the house. I put back on the walls the pictures of Edith that Britney had hidden in the closet. I returned the memorabilia, the books, the collections to their places. The house gradually reverted to its former state, warm, cozy, filled with memories. Roar called a week later. The conversation was brief and reserved. He said that they were settling into their new place, that he was doing well. I didn't ask about Britney, and he didn't mention her name. "I'm thinking about your offer," he said before saying goodbye. "About counseling. Maybe you're right, and I need help." It was a small glimmer of hope, and I decided to cling to it. Life was slowly taking a new course. I resumed my weekly gatherings with friends that Britney had effectively prohibited. Patrick came over again on Thursdays for a chess game. Franklin stopped by on Saturdays, and we discussed politics and new books. I even joined a group of veterans who volunteered at the local animal shelter. One day, while sorting through old items in the garage, I came across a stamp album I had started collecting in my youth but had abandoned due to lack of time. Turning the yellowed pages, looking at the colorful miniatures from various parts of the world, I felt the long-forgotten thrill of a collector. The next day, I visited the Philatelic Club, which I had discovered from the local newspaper. There, I was welcomed with such warmth and enthusiasm that I immediately felt part of the community. Stamp collecting became my new passion, filling the void left by my son's departure. I also decided to tackle the garden, which I had kept in only minimal order since Edith's death. Now, with ample time and energy, I could implement some of the ideas we had once discussed with her. I planted new rose bushes, her favorites, created a small pond with lilies, and built a gazebo for summer evenings. Working in the garden brought not only physical satisfaction but also peace of mind. Sometimes, while trimming hedges or weeding beds, I talked to Edith as if she were beside me. I told her about Roar, about my worries and hopes, asked her for advice, and it seemed to me that through the rustling of leaves, through the singing of birds, she answered me. Roar called regularly, now once a week. Our conversations became more and more open. He told me that he'd started seeing a therapist, first secretly from Britney, then openly despite her protests. "You were right, Dad," he said in one conversation. "This relationship isn't healthy. I'm starting to realize that." I didn't push. I didn't demand immediate solutions. I just supported him, reminded him that I loved him, and would always be there for him, no matter what he decided. Today, 2 months after they left, I sit in the garden enjoying the warm spring evening. My home has become a sanctuary again, a place where I feel safe and secure. I am no longer alone. I have friends, hobbies, plans for the future. I don't know if Roar will ever come back, if he'll be able to break free of Britney's influence. But I've done my best, and now the choice is his. Sometimes you have to lose something to find yourself. I lost my son, hopefully temporarily, but I gained freedom, dignity, and a new meaning to life. And for that, I'm grateful even to Britney and her cunning schemes. She unwittingly forced me to shake things up, to step out of my comfort zone, to take